Now, the World Bank said they expect Nigeria's economy to grow by 2.1% this year. IMF came with its own more recent 2.5%. But we expect a tempered growth of 2.55%. And why do we say that? Because Nigeria is still spending money on infrastructure. Okay, if we keep spending on infrastructure, that will have an impact on what I said earlier on, velocity of transactions. And of course, ultimately, also help in terms of logistics. Inflation rate, I don't expect the rate to come down anywhere. In fact, what I expect is between 12.5 mentioned there and 13%, maybe a little above 13. And why? You cannot escape inflation if your economy is growing. So to expect growth in the economy and also dream of single-digit inflation is an aberration in economics. So that will happen. And of course, there's also an official reason, which is undisclosed, why exchange rate will remain within that band. And the major reason for that is unlikely to be resolved this year. So what we expect to happen there is in 2021.
Now we have with us the Director General, Budget Office. Thank you so much for joining us. Ben Akwabuze is here with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
You have listened to Mr. Rotimi. You want to respond to some of the things that you heard him say?
Well, yes. The truth of the matter is that, and sometimes I really don't blame people. Perhaps if I was in their shoes, I would be saying the same, not being close enough to, the numbers. But the reality today is that given our, aspirations for development, borrowing at the time being is inevitable if we have the population growing at the rate at which it's growing, and as a people we don't have a consensus as to how we deal with that, given the significant infrastructure deficit. Of course, we can look back, spend the time looking back and trying to apportion blame, but the reality is we have a challenge today. In 2019, the total revenues available to the federal government that we were able to generate to fund the budget was 4.6 trillion naira. We spent 2.5 trillion naira on debt service, and personnel cost itself was over 2 trillion naira. So, okay, so what are the options? Your debt service obligation today is what it is. This is the cost of the cumulative debt you've acquired over the last 60 years plus. Your personnel cost. It might sound easy, or why don't you just sack the people? But what is the reality today is that will simply exacerbate the socioeconomic, situation. It's not a solution.
Well, you said the other time, that it's about where we are now,
yes.
But and that's the reality that's been painted, and of course everyone looks at that. But the challenge here is that it seems a culture for us as a nation to always borrow. I mean, you've talked about the reality now, but it's been the same thing for decades. So people are wondering, why don't we have structures in place to help us get to the point where we are as self-sustainable as possible?
The solution is in taxation, as happens in other. And the taxation is the principal way that governments get funded all over the world. And so that's my problem, that many people, when they talk about, we talked about cutting the cost of government by 40%. I'm not sure that he actually understands what the numbers look like. What is the reality today? Take the 2019 budget. The total overhead budget for all the agencies of the federal government, the ministries, the presidency, all of the tertiary educations, the health institutions, the research institutions, there are over 1,100 budget units. The total overhead budget was 263 billion naira. At the end of the day, because of funding constraints, we couldn't even, we couldn't fund up to 200 billion naira of that. So if you ask many of the federal agencies, they were only able to get, 2/3 of their overhead budget released for 2019. What do you want to cut there? Even if you made the overhead budget zero, he talked about a 40% cut. There's nothing to cut. Even if you made the overhead budget zero, that's not going to provide a solution.
Speaking of solution, one thing he spoke about was the fact that he suggested that the government should probably partner with the private sector. I'm not sure if he caught that. He suggested concession.
Yeah, I heard that. It's easier to... I used to work for the Lagos state government. We tried to concession the Lekki-Ekpe Express, expressway. That transaction got rave reviews all over the world, but was so much vilified here. People simply are not prepared to pay. We're not prepared to pay taxes. We're not prepared to pay user fees. And we still have this mindset that we are a rich economy. We aren't. We are here, people, they talk about, we are oil rich. Let me just give you an example what oil rich economies look like. Saudi Arabia, this is 10 million barrels of oil a day for barely just over 30 million people. And their production cost is well under $10 per barrel. We produce 2 million barrels a day for 200 million people. Our production cost is over $30 dollars per barrel. Because as the people in the industry will tell you, insecurity alone, adds $10 to that, to that cost. When people keep rupturing, these are the numbers. At the end of the day,
what is worrisome for a number of people is, okay, now we're borrowing another $22.7 billion. It's not the problem of borrowing, it's the problem of paying back.
True. And so the critical thing is, what are we going to spend this $22 billion on? First of all, nobody's going out there. This is a medium-term borrowing plan. Okay? If you recall, about three years ago, the president submitted then a borrowing plan for about $29.6 billion.
To the 8th Assembly.
Meant to be, yes. The 8th Assembly chose then not to deal with it as a plan. They wanted to deal with it, piecemeal. And so it's that same document over that period, these 3 years plus, we've only drawn about 6 or 9 billion of that, whatever. So it's not in the $2.7 billion plan doesn't say somebody stepping out tomorrow to go and borrow $22 billion. Every year, the budget itself makes, provision for what the deficit will be and what the borrowing limits for that year will be. And this is set, okay, taking account of your debt sustainability, your ability to pay. So the fact that you have 22.7, if the revenues don't improve, that gives you the capacity to be able to service that debt. You're not going to draw on the debt.
So you've talked about the budget and revenue. We know there's been the conversation around reviewing the budget, a midterm review. The Minister of Finance recently was talking about the price of crude oil. We understand there's a meeting in Vienna, and we're not sure what will come out of that meeting. But as it stands right now, $49 per barrel. That's the price of crude oil this morning. And
No,
our benchmark...
Channels this morning is reporting 51 plus.
That was yesterday. Our benchmark is $57.
Yes.
So that's a gap of about $8. I did the math. 8 times 2 million, that's 16 by 365. That's about $5 billion. That's how much we're potentially... I'm getting somewhere.
Your math is not
I'm getting
correct.
somewhere.
Yes.
But it's just a picture, to give us a picture of how much we're not going to make as a result of the fact that this price of crude is dropping. So the question is,
correct.
if we're reviewing this, what is the possibility, basically? That's just to give a picture of how much we probably won't get, but please clear the air.
First of all, okay, let me explain. Of these 2 million barrels that we produce, 2 million barrels doesn't accrue to government. We have partners in this business. The JV partners, we have the independents. That's what the country produces. The government share of that 2 million barrels is about 50%, is about half of that. It did a little under a million barrels. That's what we get. And that's what is available for the entire federation, not just the federal government. The rest of it accrues to our partners. That's one point. The other thing to note is that the prices that you quote are Brent prices. Nigerian, blend of crude enjoys a premium price of on average $2 per barrel. So whenever you get the Brent price, if you're referencing Nigeria, add $2 to be able to say. That's, as the Minister of Finance said, we plan to do a mid-year budget review. At the mid-year, point, we will review it. If it looks like this, price reduction, is something that's going to be sustained, and it's all down to how quickly, this coronavirus plague can be brought to. By January, before the coronavirus broke, the EIA's, projection for oil price this year was for $64 per barrel. So the truth is, oil price is a subject on which many economists have ruined their careers trying to project, oil price. So there are all kinds of imponderables. So there's no point to get in panic mode. Okay, OPEC itself is determined to, not let prices fall below. Listen, OPEC has already now determined to, made a decision to cut production.
That's
about,
OPEC plus.
1 million barrels. Nigeria, of course, is going to get its share of that, of that cut. So yes, there is concern, but let's not get into panic mode yet. We're in risk management mode. Within the NMPC itself, they're doing their own numbers, looking at what we're doing our own numbers. By the media, we'll check. We'll see what the prognosis for the rest of the year will be, and that will then determine whether we need to scale back. Of course, if we scale back on the revenue from oil, we'll either be able to find revenue from other sources to plug that gap, or we will have to cut expenditure, or we will have to increase borrowing to keep expenditure at the same level.
You referenced the impact of coronavirus, on Nigeria's economy now. And it would seem, of course, no one expected that. It wasn't part of what Nigeria considered in the budget. How vulnerable is the Nigerian economy now?
As I said, it's a cause for concern, okay?
And I'm sorry.
But when you say are you vulnerable arising from the coronavirus?
I'm not basing it on just. I'm just saying
Okay.
how vulnerable, because we didn't expect this was going to happen.
Yes.
If God forbid that anything should happen, how vulnerable generally is the Nigerian economy?
Well, many years ago, we used to think the Nigerian economy was decoupled from if you remember, during the 2008, 2009 global financial crisis. Initially, we were told, oh, Nigeria is insulated, but we found that that's not the case. We're a significant part of the global economy. So, and especially where our principal source of next is a commodity of such international, significance, we cannot but be affected. Our people are very mobile, our people are by the place, so we cannot then also be immune from. But how vulnerable, I wouldn't classify us as vulnerable. If you take even the debt, that is without a doubt a concern. In Africa, with 4 countries, you have a categorization of African countries in terms of debt vulnerability. There are about 10 countries in Africa that are already in debt crisis. There is another early 15 that are classified as high risk category. Nigeria is neither classified as in debt crisis or in high risk category at the moment. But of course, as I keep going back to the issue of revenue, our number one challenge on the fiscal side,
the revenue generation,
is revenues. And I sincerely hope that like yourselves will understand this and join in that effort to whatever. That's what the Finance Act 2020 at least set out to accomplish. There's still a lot of work that that needs to happen to grow our revenues.
Just one final little thing, if I can put it in. So where, by the way, the 2020 budget has kicked in, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned recently that 400 billion naira has been released. Am I right?
Yes.
So what are they for? Briefly, before we go.
Basically, we've prioritized the construction, the agencies who have construction projects, because they need to take advantage of the dry season. That's one of the advantages of getting the budget passed early, because the first 4 months of the year are dry season months. But just to close loop on this coronavirus, it's not all gloom in terms of when oil prices fall, they actually affect us in multiple ways, some positive, some negative. For instance, because of the not desirable situation where we practically import all the petroleum products that we consume, when prices drop, of crude, the prices of refined products drop. That means that the cost, what we're spending, the under recovery, whatever, also reduces. When global economic growth projections drop like this, what happens is interest rates also drop.
Okay.
So the cost of our debt comes down. But of course, that's not to say those will offset the revenue loss.
Well, we could go on and on this, because I would have loved to find out how soon you think we'll be debt-free, but I can't ask you that one now, because I need to take a lecture. We'll have to thank you very much, Director General, Debt Management Office, Ben Akabusi.
Of the Budget Office of the Federation.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're back in a moment. Please stay with us.